chemtrails? What are chemtrails?
Chemical trails, Daddy, and they're very bad.
I look up to the sky. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? I don't wanna see you.
Okay. And we're live. Dane, go ahead.
This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org radio. We don't seem to have our song today. Not sure what happened on the station end there, but this is a GeoEngineeringWatch.org update for December 13th, 2014. Have Russ Tanner with us today. As always, Greg Palin from Georgia with us as well. No shortage of stories to cover. One often wonders where you start with this. I just watched the CNN propaganda on 9/11, and of course they're discussing the torture issue. Is it legal? Is it not? Is that really a valid discussion to artificially drown somebody 183 times in one case? That's not torture. We have to discuss that as if it's really debatable at this point. And what's interesting is the person that they had on, and I'll go into the fact that, you know, all this division that's being created by the power structure with the black-white division and the other areas they try to divide our society so we can't look up and see what's going on above our heads every day. But they just showed a 9/11 wife of a victim, who is still apparently completely convinced that it's those guys over there across the pond, the terrorists, not apparently aware the buildings don't fall down for no reason, like in the case of Building 7, and apparently has done no investigation even though her husband died in this issue. And what she was saying on CNN, this wife of a victim of the 9/11 attacks, which clearly can only be concluded came from elements inside her own government, she was convinced that we should stop funding the Saudis and people like them. And apparently she doesn't know that the only plane that was allowed to fly after 9/11, the only plane, carried 93 Saudis safely back home without questioning. Even relatives of Osama bin Laden were given a free plane ride home when nobody else was allowed to fly. And she still can't connect the dot as to who's behind all this? That's astounding to me. And now let's go on to the big division that we see, the black-white division, that the power structure so effectively plays this card, and so many people effectively play into it. And none of them looking up. And I do feel for especially the man who was strangled to death and said, I can't get air. I mean, my God, there's absolutely no excuse for that. No excuse for that happening. And I understand the outrage. I do understand it. But what about the hundreds of thousands of victims that are being killed by our country's wars of aggression overseas? Hundreds of thousands of people. What about the sanctions against Iraq that killed up to 500,000 people, including women and children? And we had Madeleine Albright say on the record, does she think it was worth it? Yeah, she thought that was worth it. What did Iraq do to us? Did they invade us? Did they, got a lot of background noise coming from somewhere there, Russ or Greg, but did they invade us, or did Iraq attack us? I mean, is there that big of a disconnect? There is, unfortunately. So what I'm getting at is we have all this process in the street over events that appeared wrong, and especially in that one case, causing the division between law enforcement and members of the community so that they can't focus on the bigger picture, so they can't stop to think, what about Obama? What about members of our government that are responsible for the drone strikes that in some cases blow up wedding parties, killing 50 people at once? Shouldn't there be some outrage about that as well? Instead of these isolated incidents that matter, I'm not saying they don't matter, but where's the bigger picture in all this? The power structure doesn't want any of us to see the bigger picture. They want the division between law enforcement and the public. They absolutely want that, and they're being very effective at it because everybody goes for the bait. Everybody. Law enforcement goes for the bait. The population goes for the bait. And so we have lots of media theater focusing on everything but the bigger picture. What about the fact that how many people have died from respiratory mortality, from the spraying that goes on above our heads every single day? It would take one protest, like what we see in cities around the country today, all day, one protest like that, with that many people actually showing up, and the climate engineering insanity would be on the radar, right then and there. Instead of a week and a half ago, when we, in spite of a lot of planning and announcement, had 75 people show up that actually bothered to take the time, and I'm grateful for those people. We did a lot of good, and by the time we get the videos out, there'll be plenty of good that comes from that event. But it would take one protest, even a fraction of the size of what we see happening today, and climate engineering would be on the radar. But that doesn't happen because the power structure so successfully divides the population with these events that come up. And the population doesn't look at the bigger picture. That's sad, and I hope they start to. And so back to respiratory mortality, even all this population that's marching around today, all breathing in what's being sprayed above their heads, and nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to care because they've been effectively distracted. And this is something that we have to get over. Society has to get over this. The whole Democratic-Republican division nonsense, and one week it's this party's fault, the next week it's that party's fault. It's all smoke and mirrors. People have to wake up to this. They absolutely have to wake up. We'll take calls pretty early on today because I want to go into deeper discussion on all this, so that while all this sleight of hand is going on, our biosphere is being torn apart. The fragile layer of atmosphere that allows us to live on this planet is being ripped apart by the day, not just by climate engineering. That's something else people need to absolutely accept, because too many people don't accept it. There's a lot of things hurting our environment. Any notion otherwise is simply denial as well. But climate engineering first and foremost, while that's going on, all these other distractions keeping people from seeing with any clarity at all. We had this week in Lima, Peru, the AMIG group made important announcements, and I posted 3 of these videos, which have since been disabled. I think there's one still functional, but those videos are worth watching because for the first time, members of the scientific community have finally stated it clearly. On this current trajectory, we're done. If we stay on this course, we're done. Again, this is the Thelma and Louise moment. We're through the guardrail. We're careening down into the canyon, and people are still in the car, are still arguing about what seat they get. That's how insane our situation is right now. We have a life or death situation on planet Earth, and people are simply having idle chatter while the car is in free fall to the bottom of the canyon. So people absolutely have to wake up. We had this week the North State newspaper, which we just did a sit-in last a week ago, Friday on December 5th. Their editor censored. They targeted me directly in an editorial. The editor of the paper targeted me directly, even though I refused to talk to their reporters who came looking for me. I refused for this reason, because I knew they would target me and try to marginalize the whole issue by focusing on me. So I refused to talk to them, but their editor went after me anyway. And then he takes my submission, my response, which journalistically he's responsible to publish since he targeted me, and edits the hell out of it. Refused to let me make mention of the fact that GeoEngineering is the cover article for Newsweek. Refused to let me even mention that in my editorial response. And further, refused to allow me to make any statement that indicates this is a current priority discussion with governments around the globe and the entire climate science community. Refused that. In fact, I'll be publishing that dialogue so everybody can see his censorship. Nope, I won't publish this. Unless you say this and this and this, I won't publish this. That's the kind of censorship we have. So until people actually get up, join us in the fight, support the effort to expose these people, they're going to keep doing it until our planet goes into total meltdown. And on that note, Northern California, the big monster storm. And the Weather Channel, anybody who watches the Weather Channel theater would be clear on this, and I think, Greg, you can elaborate on this in a minute, because I think you watched some of this week. But they're given certain words, certain mantras that they repeat. It's either the deadly cold if they're whipping up an engineered cool down, or in this case, it's the monster storm in California. They've repeated that term so many times in recent days, it rings in your ears. It was a completely run-of-the-mill storm in most places. Yes, there was a few downpours, but one has to ask, if this is a normal storm, why did it rain so hard in a populated area like San Francisco? And then when the rain, which is flat, by the way, there's no orographic enhancement in San Francisco, that shouldn't squeeze most of the rain out of the clouds moving over San Francisco. Yes, you might have hard rain there, and we did, but then why was the rain less in many of the mountainous areas, like our area? Why was it less? That's completely wrong. When you have orographic enhancement, it should wring the clouds out. Not anymore, because the clouds are being aerosolized. So they make us sound like some monster storm when we had a very run-of-the-mill. We had several inches of rain over several days. And we live in a boreal rainforest. We've had 5 inches of rain in just over an hour before. It was extremely run-of-the-mill, no erosion at all. So they pick a few areas where they had a few deluges, they theaterize it, and everybody buys it. So now they think the drought's over. We're 200 inches of rain short where I live, 200. You can't make that up. You can never make it up because the trees aren't going to come back to life. They're dead. In many places, they're dead. And you don't hear the Weather Channel talking about the record warm occurring right now in the top northern tier states, 30 degrees above normal, all-time record highs everywhere. They don't talk about that. In fact, there's no weather at all on Weather Channel this weekend again for the third weekend in a row. It's a marathon of reality shows because they don't really want to talk about that kind of weather. But I guarantee you, if they were engineering a cool-down event, it would be weather all weekend long on Weather Channel. I guarantee it. Already seen it this year. So the bottom line is they tell us what they want to tell us. They divide us with the black-white division, the law enforcement civilian division that so many people buy into. And again, it doesn't mean there's not some bad things happening. It doesn't mean that. But it means when they air, for example, the father of the boy that was shot in Ferguson, when they air him screaming, burn it down, which he's horribly wrong for that. That guy is the father of that boy is a menace. He should not be allowed to be aired in that way, which absolutely fueled the flames of this whole conflict. And at the same time, you have law enforcement behaving barbarically in many places. Same thing. But everybody buys into it. In the meantime, hundreds and thousands of civilians are being killed. Huge, huge issues around the globe. Scientists saying that on this current trajectory, no life left on the planet by 2040. No stories on that at all. So anyway, I hope everybody wakes up. Forgive the rant, but everybody listening, I think a lot of people that tune into this show are trying to do their best to carry the ball forward and doing an excellent job, by the way. There's people that are really, really, really being assertive right now. So many activists that are getting things done. They're getting things done. They're starting spot fires, and those fires are starting to burn. And I don't think they can keep our story down much longer. So forgive that rant. We'll open the phones up in a couple minutes. First, Russ, any update in your area? I know you're having a tough time breathing still. I know they're spraying the hell out of you there. Any update?
Yeah, I mean, we had a little bit of snowfall. During the snowfall, we had the classic mottled glue type of odor in the air that a lot of people did pick up on. This is something that a lot of people are starting to pick up on. It's very interesting that we have a video now where people have collected snow in a bowl, let it melt, sifted it through cheesecloth, and it had this gooey white substance in it, and they actually specifically said it smells like mottled glue. And this is the same snow that doesn't seem to melt. And this odor appeared at the same time as the snow, actually about an hour before the snowfall started here in Philadelphia. So that's an interesting thing. I'd like to have this substance tested. If anybody does a collection and wants help testing it, I'm sure they can contact me, contact Dane. We'll hook them up with a lab and see if we can get something done on this. So,
hey, Russ, a new video, if you have the means of getting it done, a new video like what Greg did last year. Greg did an excellent video because this stuff is definitely being chemically nucleated. There's no question about that. In fact, I saw flakes here falling 2 days ago at 50 degrees, and of course the rain diminished radically. This is back to what I started in the early part of the show. As they start to heavily nucleate, it's very visible in the clouds. We had very warm air coming in. We had very warm air on the backside. So why is it changing to snow somewhere in between? Changing over to snow, as the Weather Channel states, because they're nucleating it, which causes the endothermic reaction, which diminishes the rain over our area. And sure enough, they had some snowfall in a few places further north of us here. And they were able to create some headlines. But if you could get a film of some flame put to that snow to see how much it sublimates, how much it converts from a solid to a gas with very little liquid coming off it, that would be very interesting to add that to our current archive of data. We had a lot from last year, but not so much from this year.
Yeah, I would love to see that happen. I know that I do have a video of somebody who's taken the substance that smells like model glue and has it in a spoon, in a bowl, and is showing it to the public. So I would love to see that tested, and we have a lot of videos, of course, of people trying to melt snowballs. And Greg did one, and people should try to replicate this, where he scraped ice from the freezer, Greg, and you can maybe elaborate on this if you want, but you scraped ice from the freezer, put it next to a snowball, and melted the freezer ice snowball, but the one from the snow outside didn't melt. Great video.
Yeah, it actually took, from my recollection, it was like 7.5 minutes over a piping hot wood stove for a drop of water to come out of that snowball, which is really odd. Whereas, the one out of the freezer immediately started to drip. And, you could say that, well, the stove wasn't, 500 degrees, the stove wasn't 300 degrees. It was a piping hot wood stove, and it should, from my recollection of how natural snow reacts, it should take something less than 7.5 minutes for a snowball to produce a drop of water over a piping hot wood stove that was hot enough to burn the back of my hand.
Well, again, we've had everybody from farmers to ranchers. They've all noticed that something's very, very wrong with the snow. And still the amount of denial going on in society that this is marginalized, that people, if you even bring up the notion that there could be weather modification going on, they look at you like some antennas just sprouted from your head. And, this is the kind of programming we live with. Absolutely. The historical documentation of these programs is immense and undeniable, and yet people still want to stay in their bubble. So we're going to see a whole lot more ice nucleating, because right now the temperatures are off the charts to the high side. Again, 30-plus degrees above normal in parts of the top center of the country, and this is going to continue. It's not going to get better. It's not going to go away. The planet's not cooling, and we're headed for the warmest year ever recorded. And I challenge people, Google that. Get over Al Gore. Get over it, and Google it, and help to put out credible data so that when they try to sell us geoengineering as a, quote, cure, people will already know after 65 years, given what's happening to our planet, we know climate engineering is a curse far worse than the ailment is, and the ailment is horrible. So people, the more you understand the clear picture of what's happening, and don't help sell geoengineering by pretending that the cool downs are in any way natural. They're not. We're discussing it right now. They're not natural. These cooled events are not natural, and the cool layer in the ground is very shallow, very shallow. That's how they create the illusion of winter in a planet that's absolutely warming radically fast, and geoengineering is making it worse. Every cool down they create, every one, makes the overall warming worse. But they don't care. Back to the use of the chemical Corexit in the Gulf of Mexico. If you don't know what that is, look it up. Corexit, what an acronym, what a name for a chemical that does nothing but make things exponentially worse, made that situation 52 times more toxic according to environmental impact reports. So they used a chemical that made the situation that much worse in order to hide it. Climate engineering, same scenario. Russ, can you open up the phone lines? We'll get some dialogue going.
Absolutely. For those who want to call, the phone number is, I'm going to paste this in the chat room as well, 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Dane, I would also mention that in Maine, there's 2 wells at the house that I lived at there, and one of them's a surface well. It's a 25-foot surface well. It's out of water. Ran out of water a couple months ago. First time that's happened, so they had to switch to the deep well. Very low, whatever's being reported, for some reason, there's no water in the well. So they're low on rainwater too as well. So something's going on. But I'm gonna put this number in the chat room for those who want to call in.
Russ, I wanted to make one quick point in regard to the snow samples. It's very interesting when you start doing these samples how you can tell you're on the right track when they pull a guy like Brad Panovich chief meteorologist for NBC Charlotte out of bed. We actually, track the hours back. And he gets on my YouTube channel, my Facebook page, trying to explain away the way the snow acted to a natural process called sublimation. Then you got Phil Plait, the bad astronomer, and really what he is a bad actor. I mean, this guy got on, made a video, and his YouTube count went into the hundreds and hundreds of thousands in minutes, which in itself is suspect. But he made a really crazy video. Again, talk about bad acting. He came out and I actually made a spoof of it. He came out and said, "These are whack jobs down in Atlanta who think they have snow that doesn't melt." I mean, it's crazy. And it's the same on Weather Channel. It's so obvious that these guys are just paid bad actors.
On that note, Greg, since you're watching it now, and you know why I've been completely livid at their behavior now that you see it, correct? I mean, is it...
Yeah, I mean, I got rid of my TV about a year and a half ago because I just had too many other things to do, but I got it back because we're going to do this Weather Channel event, and Dane and I have been talking about it a lot, and it's preposterous. The Ultimate Sportsman's Lodge with Tom Brokaw, Jim Belushi, and Huey Lewis, Fat Guys in the Woods, Prospectors, The $1 Million Mountain. It's like our life is just a big reality show at this point. Let's not talk about anything that matters. Let's just immerse people in reality shows.
And if there's some weather they don't want to cover, like this weekend, and Russ, I just sent you another map. If you could forward those to the chat room, I'd be grateful, because this is the kind of weather they are not covering. Absolutely off-the-chart record highs and no coverage. In fact, they don't even do weather because it's best to just avoid the whole subject. So,
while AMEG says, Dane, Arctic Methane Emergency Group says that we could have a Blue Ocean event by September of 2015. I mean, these are epic events.
What people don't, to explain that term, that means that no summer Arctic ice, and I know people are going to jump up and down and say the ice caps are expanding and so on and so forth. This is not true. The only ice that has showed expansion is the Antarctic sea ice, and that's because there's so much water pouring off the land ice, and the fresh water freezes at 3 degrees higher temperature, so there is a bit more sea ice according to many of the stats. Now, those stats are even suspect, but as far as the Arctic goes, this is absolutely not the case, and again, they are geoengineering over the poles beyond belief. This is a fact. If you look at anything from the Inuits' statements there, they don't see the sun ever. They talk about this. I mean, there was an article out this week talking about this, that they're trying radically and very destructively and counterproductively to keep that little bit of ice left in the Arctic, because imagine when that headline comes out. Now, all of a sudden, climate engineering has to be exposed. And that's why we're fighting for that point as well. Not that it's good when the ice disappears in the summer in the Arctic, or blows apart, but once that happens, they can't hide climate engineering either. That's why they're trying desperately to keep that last little bit there. And we see people...
And they'll...
Go ahead.
Go ahead. They'll never be able to stop the spraying because they're destroying the ozone layer.
That's right. So the more they spray, the more they decide they have to spray in order to try to hide the damage they've already done from the spraying to begin with. I mean, this is the epitome of human insanity, the absolute epitome. And you have people, again, this doesn't help the credibility of our cause either. When people say they're trying to melt the ice in the Arctic to get at the resources, you have to separate out the separate components of this puzzle. Are there oil companies that want to get at those resources? Absolutely. There will always be disaster capitalists, always. Does that mean they're trying to melt the ice, and does saying that help our cause? No. No, it doesn't mean that. In fact, if people looked at the data, the pile mass ice extent data from 2007 when the ice almost imploded, and that's when we saw a radical ramp-up in climate engineering, trying to shade the Arctic to keep that last little bit of ice there, causing the rest of the planet to warm overall in doing so, but they did it anyway because that's what they do. If you say things that are so radically departed from what the data shows, from what the climate engineering does understand, the climate engineering community, or climate science community, I should say, then we lose credibility. So all I'm saying is you have to separate the baby from the bathwater, because Al Gore wants to make money off of global warming, and he does. He's completely hypocritical. When Al Gore wants to make money off of global warming, does that mean it's not happening? That's very, very poor deductive reasoning. Very poor. So it's imperative we stand on solid ground. And we all agree that the spraying needs to stop. So back to the massive division we see right now and all the hundreds of thousands of people that are marching over some injustices, I agree. But how much bigger is the injustice happening above our heads that nobody seems to want to face? Injustices that will determine all our fates, not the fate of a few individuals here and there, but all of our fate. And people should be down there marching with these groups, passing out flyers. I'll send flyers to anybody who wants to march with these groups and say, hey, by the way, there's a bigger issue going on above your head. You're breathing it, and who knows how many of your family members it's already sickened or killed. Respiratory mortality has gone from 8th on the list of mortality in the continental U.S. from 2005 to 3rd in 2010. We think it's 2nd now, and the CDC is hiding this. How many more people has that killed? Tens, hundreds of thousands. Let's go wake these people up that are marching in the streets, that there's a bigger, much, much bigger issue going on. And anybody who wants to march with those people, I will send you flyers for free. I will send you whatever you need for free if you'll go march with those crowds and start passing out some flyers. Russ, if you get a call, you let me know.
Yeah, we got a caller with your number that ends in 08. Welcome to the show. Who will be speaking with?
This is Corey. Good morning, you guys, or good afternoon.
Hi, Corey.
Hey, Corey.
I just wanted to, basically, this is really short. I was just going to give you an observation. As you know, I'm in Prescott, Arizona. We had our first snow today. It was brief. The flakes were really large, and it was 46 degrees. So there you go.
46.
Yeah,
so,
46.
And that's with you might see the temperatures come down as the nucleated event continues on a little bit. But so it's that temperature there in Arizona, and right now in Montana and Minnesota, it's pushing 70 in places.
Right. Right.
I mean, people should understand the train is completely off the rails, completely. And I doubt they can hide it much longer. They're pushing for World War III. There's no question they're pushing toward that right now. And a lot of people all too willing to go there. And they're being distracted by all the events I just named. That's not an accident that all these events are happening, not at all. And it's not an accident that there's no justice being served up for specifically the one police officer who choked the man to death. That's all certainly part of the design. People need to wake up to such obvious ploys to distract.
Right.
They do. And Corey, on your the filament story, I mean, I think the listeners probably know a bit about that, but the bottom line is on the filaments that you saw fall from the sky that the mainstream media news determined was cattle gauze, and now we know what it is, correct? I mean, is there any attempt to contact them and to make them accountable for their complete disinformation?
We are, from a number of angles. There are some other news reporters that are looking at that and shaking their heads, and also the Representative Gosar's office is looking into it. And we're testing some of the samples further for biologicals. So I think there were 4 radio programs that we did just this week discussing it, and people are very interested, very alarmed. We're getting a lot of reports from other people. One of the most interesting was from somebody in Northeast Tennessee who's been observing the same and filming them since November of 2013. And it's happened in all seasons, including below zero weather. So,
well, you know what, if I could elaborate on something right there, because you bring up an important point, and it's a question people throw at me a lot. If it's already cold, they can't understand why they would continue to ice nucleate if it's already, say, below freezing. Because they want to drop the mercury as low as possible in the ground to create whatever headlines, whatever theater they can. So it's not a surprise that this ice nucleation goes on even when it's already cold. Whatever the temperature's at, the nucleation can drop it down another 15, 20 degrees under the right circumstances, and they want the mercury as low as possible. They want to create the biggest headline possible. So just because it's cold where you're at, people shouldn't question, well, why would they ice nucleate if it's already cold here? Cold is a relevant term. Headlines are the goal. So the colder they can make it, even though it's a shallow surface area, they continue to try.
Correct.
Corey, did you already do your InfoWars interview?
That interview will be Tuesday. It's InfoWars Nightly News, and that'll be done Tuesday, this coming Tuesday.
Tuesday at what time, Corey? Will you post it on Facebook?
I will. Yeah,
Good.
it's their
Good.
evening news, and so I'm not really sure what time that airs, but it'll be
People
be
need to
done
listen in for that
yesterday.
one.
Please post that. And also another interesting event last week. I was contacted by the producers of John B. Wells' show Caravan to Midnight, who had been trying to email me repeatedly, none of which I got. They finally called and asked why I wasn't responding, and I didn't respond because I never got any of their emails. They had the right email. Why aren't I getting those emails? What other emails aren't I or the rest of us not getting? We can't know. But thankfully, John B. Wells will also be covering this issue at 8 a.m. Tuesday morning Pacific time. More and more people are realizing the gravity of this issue, that all these other issues won't matter at all if we don't take care of this issue.
Correct.
So,
Correct. Yeah, more is coming, and they're taking it very seriously. They're not trying to spin it off into any esoteric realms, and the hosts seem to be very knowledgeable and genuinely interested, and they also want updates. So they're not only talking about the filaments and webs when they're speaking to us, they're also questioning weather modification and all the other aspects of geoengineering and using the appropriate terms. So that's really encouraging. I think it's really encouraging. So,
on the note of them caring, and all of us need to consider this, that this issue is immensely dire, as most of us know, and when we're communicating to family members or friends, we need to convey that sense of urgency and not state, and be confident of our data as well, as we talked about before. We are standing on solid ground. This is absolutely going on. So when we communicate to other people, we should certainly avoid saying, gee, could you perhaps look at this data someday if you have absolutely nothing else to do? That's not good enough. And if you alienate some people, so what? So what? There's nothing else you can do. I'm not saying be abrasive, but I'm saying this to convey to people with confidence, the confidence that we should feel, given the magnitude of this issue and the amount of proof we have, that this is an extremely dire issue. It warrants your immediate attention. I hope that you will give it the attention it deserves and leave it at that. And if whatever their response, that's a very reasonable request to make under the circumstances. And we should make that request confidently, absolutely confidently.
Dane, there's one other thing I'd like to contribute. A few months ago, we know that net neutrality was lost on the web. And I want to just say that on two of my activist websites where I exposed geoengineering and other crimes against humanity, started having major server problems for about a month, but it wasn't the server. It was the communication. It was the communication between the server and the people who are trying to get to the site. And the problem sorted out within about 3 weeks, and now I'm noticing lags. Now, this is very interesting. Two of my sites are activist sites. The rest of them are either business or personal websites, and they are showing no lags at all. But the two activist sites are showing delays, and the delays are not coming from the server. So I believe that there are now artificial delays being induced in the delivery of our geoengineering website right now as I speak, and that's been going on now for at least a couple weeks.
It's not a surprise. And Russ, the test you did on a YouTube, we felt the YouTube numbers were being underreported radically, and the test you did proved that to a degree that can barely be believed. I mean, if I remember the figures right, you put up a page with a counter and had over 40,000 visits to the page, and the YouTube counter measured 1,100. Is that not right?
That's about right. Yeah, I mean, it was about 1/10 of what the actual views were, and we metered that on our own page, and YouTube was not showing that.
So, I mean, again, we see this on the numbers, just like what Greg described. When Greg did a video that was very well received and got a fair amount of counts, and suddenly anything that's counter to that, anything that's disinformation, the counts go through the roof almost instantly. So,
and people need to understand why this happens, because people are followers. The public follow people that they we got a lot of background noise coming here. People follow things that they perceive are popular. And so when they have a lot of counts on a YouTube channel, people are many times more likely to watch the video if it has a very high count on it. So this is another way of marginalizing information.
That's exactly right, Russ. My nephew that sent me the Phil Plait. That's how I found out about Phil Plait, the bat astronomer. My nephew sent it to me and posted it on my Facebook. So sadly, while we try so hard to educate people that the house is on fire, you've got these disinformation crews, very sophisticated disinformation crews, because my nephew's not a stupid individual, just fell for it hook, line, and sinker.
Right, and this is the same concept, so people understand, is that if you own a restaurant, the best way to get clients is park cars in the parking lot. If you drive by a restaurant and there are no cars in the parking lot, you reduce the chances that you will have customers coming in by many times. When there are cars in the parking lot, more people are attracted. They feel safer. They feel safe in numbers. That's the same kind of mentality.
It is. It's absolutely being used against this cause and any other cause that they choose to use it again. So it's up to...
Well, if nothing else, Dane, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
They stress us out and they distract us. You had to run up and down the East Coast to get your DVDs back when your shipment didn't show up. I stressed out most of last week waiting for my signs to come in that were lost 2 days in a row. I checked with the company. They hadn't had a lost shipment in 6 months. Activist boxes that I sent to Jennifer up in Michigan. The box was ripped wide open, returned to me with no reason why. I mean, it's just really, they're working real hard to keep us distracted.
Not only that, Greg, but I know a couple people who work, at least I know more than 2 people that work at the post office, and years ago when we were having events for a political party, which is not one of the popular ones, it was a constitutionally directed political party, they did a mass mailing of an event they would had, and the postmaster actually had all of those pamphlets that advertised the event sitting in stacks at the floor at the post office, and I had people who worked in the post office tell me that they were just told to leave them there until after the event, and then they finally mailed them out. Now, does this stuff really go on? I heard this firsthand from someone who witnessed it.
Well, it does. That's why it's up to everybody to intervene in a way or put themselves in the game in a way that helps us bring this to light. And Greg, right now what you're organizing for the Weather Channel event to expose the absolute, complete disinformation theater that is the Weather Channel, the more people who can attend that event, or if you have contacts in the Georgia area, get a hold of Greg, get a hold of me, help us bring those people together. The more people that show up at that event, the better. One big event like that could really be a giant leap toward putting this issue on the radar. So, again, it's up to all of us to pull together to try to make that happen. So,
and we need to bring an umbrella also, just in case we get rain, because we can't have a low turnout because of rain or snow or whatever they might decide to throw at us. We gotta have good turnout for this thing.
Well, as preposterous as that sounds, and some people might roll their eyes at that, but that is a possibility. When we look at the Wall Street protests that happened in October, was it 2 or 3 years ago? There was the October surprise snowstorm there that was really kind of meteorologically came out of nowhere and buried those people in snow. And is that an accident? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, meteorologically speaking, looking at it, it certainly looked engineered. And then we have every other country. I put a post up last week. Every country who doesn't toe the line for the power structure gets annihilated on, of course, a much, much larger scale. But when there's clouds or rain passing over a given area already, they can do a lot of things with that. They can migrate it on, just like the Chinese government said, don't worry about rain over the Olympics because we'll make sure it doesn't happen. They wouldn't make that statement lightly. Rain didn't happen. When we look at Sochi, what a coincidence that Sochi had the warmest winter ever during the Olympics. But yet there was snow, and if you looked, it was very interesting. There was snow mostly on the mountain where the event was taking place. You look across at the mountains even several miles away, there was nothing. Nothing. And yes, they had snow-making machines on the runs themselves, but there was snow in the trees and so forth around the facilities on that one mountain.
Yeah,
they have an immense amount of control over the weather, even on a smaller scale like that. An immense amount of control. They can make it snow, as Corey just described, 46 degrees and snowing. So anybody who doesn't think that or thinks they don't have this power is simply not looking at the data.
Dane, I would contribute also that they have a very, very tight system of feedback and coordination. I talked to one of the leaders of the San Francisco protest group that go out and they hold up signs. Was twice a month in San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. They were doing a marvelous job. And I talked to one of the leaders of the group, and they actually started seeing a pattern after they started demonstrating that on every Saturday they would no longer see the trails in the sky. And this happened only on Saturday. And so it's interesting that they would be out telling everybody to look up, and suddenly on the day and the time they're protesting, there are no trails. We have callers waiting whenever you're ready, Dane.
One reply to that, for people who don't think that they have that close of monitoring of where the planes are, think about this. There are so many aircraft in the sky every day. In fact, over a small island like the UK, 5,000 flights a day. I just saw this. The coordination has to be immensely articulate. So to make such an adjustment, given the complexity of the system that they manage every single day, would seem no big deal. And we do see here when the Bohemian Grove is in session, we see a pretty big back off on the Sprang. Whenever in Northern California, whenever hurricane season is about to start, if we're getting hammered day in, day out, the second a big rotation occurs somewhere in the Atlantic, they're gone. They're gone from here. I mean, it's within hours. When a big cyclonic rotation begins, they're on it. So, Russ, you can take that call. No problem.
Okay, caller with your number that ends in 00. Welcome to the show. Who are we speaking with?
Hey, this is Dave from Connecticut, hey guys.
Hi, Dave.
We had a beautiful blue sky today, and literally in the last hour, they just started crisscrossing. I missed the beginning of the show. I had emailed you, Dane, and you responded about east-west versus north-south planes being at the same altitude. And that argument, that has worked well for, pointing out to people that understand aviation does fly at different altitudes and showing the intersecting trails. So I'm not sure if you mentioned that.
We didn't get a chance to mention that, but your point was good. I remember the email. If you have people that are observant enough to consider that, that's certainly helpful. Because a lot of people, no matter what they see with their own eyes, they can see an aircraft shutting on and off with their own eyes, and they still excuse it away. Their programming allows them to keep that in a category of it's just condensation, even though I know condensation can't turn on and off like that. So some types of denial are hard to break, but for those that are thinking people, Dave, your argument certainly is good.
Yeah, the people are programmed, but I've noticed over the years of doing this, the planting of the seeds, people that completely thought I was insane are now scratching their head and thinking. So those seeds do plant. One thing, slightly off topic, but you brought it up before, other deceptions that are happening. We're on the eve of the 2-year anniversary of the Sandy Hook massacre. And for any listeners out there that don't know, there's a new documentary out called We Need to Talk About Sandy Hook, and the powers that be are running scared. They are censoring this thing left and right, but we have it virally being uploaded to YouTube. I have it linked through my website, and we keep changing the source file every time it gets deleted, so if people want to find it. It's called We Need to Talk About Sandy Hook. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes long, but anybody that watches it will know that we've been lied to in a way as big as we were on 9/11. So
I don't deny that. Go ahead, Greg.
No, I've done a lot of research on that. In fact, I watched the first hour of that video. Did you say your name is Dave or Dan?
David.
I watched that video you're talking about last night, first hour of it, and I've done a lot of research on Sandy Hook. In fact, I did Second Amendment rallies the last 2 winters and held signs that said Sandy Hoax ? And even among the Second Amendment crowd, people look at you kind of crazy. I've had friends ask me to leave that sign in the car that are fellow hunters, and it's just interesting how brainwashed people are in regard to that. And I've had the intended effect was to appeal to the softness of the females and males, but I've had people at my dinner table, several women I can think of right off the bat having dinner with them, and I quote them when I say, oh, we've got to get those assault rifles out of the hands of these American men. And it's just sad because that's exactly the intended effect they wanted, was to be able to disarm the American people and turn the majority of the people. Thank God there's a Pew Research study came out, I think, today that said that 52% of the people are still in favor, or I should say against, gun control. So,
it's more than too. It's more than just gun control. It's mental health evaluations. There's a lot to it. That movie is a commitment, and the problem is everyone has a very short attention span in this country. Even when they wake up to chemtrails, they forget about it 10 minutes later.
They do.
If you could sit down and watch that movie for the entire movie, the second half blows the first half away. It is a life-changing movie, and I've sat down with people to watch it with them. I watched it numerous times. It wakes you up to what really happened.
Dave, send me a link to that movie, if you would, David. I would like to have that in front of my
Sure, I'll just tell you, the link is very easy. It's DITRH. It stands for Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, DITRH.com. And we keep relinking it there because they keep taking it down. But, if the link goes down, we have it back up inside of an hour.
If I could, Dave, one thing you said, David, that you think the power structure's in a panic, I fully agree with you there, not just on this issue, but in a lot of arenas. In fact, we've seen the entire winter forecast has been radically changed. And the forecast is nothing more than the scheduled weather for the continental U.S. These massive, constant, quote, polar vortex cool-downs are not happening right now. I think they're so desperate that they're just going to fire hose the moisture into the West Coast. They aerosolize it, and I did a post on this last week to show just how much of the whole North American continent was covered with largely rainless aerosolized cloud. About 95% of it covered constantly. So they need a source of moisture to aerosolize to create that cloud coverage. So they're fire hosing in from the west. They put a big cutoff low off the East Coast where they had some nucleated snow come in. I mean, it's warm water right off the Atlantic. Why would it just, quote, turn over to snow? Why does snow longer have anything to do with elevation in many cases? It's just you're on the snow side of the storm or the rain side of the storm. I mean, this is meteorologically completely wrong. So they're trying to pump moisture in, get it over the continental U.S. so they can aerosolize it, scatter it as you aerosolize with these conductive particulates, and then you scatter them with the frequencies that cause these particulates to repel each other and scatter out in every direction. And you see on the radar, it's so clear wherever there's rain, you'll see this broadcast white going out in every direction. Then you know they're aerosolizing that rain, siphoning off the moisture, and turning it into artificial cloud cover. So they're back to the desperation of the power structure. Right now, the climate system's unraveling by the day. Geopolitical events are unraveling by the day. News is coming out like what David's bringing to our attention. The walls are closing in the power structure, makes them even more dangerous. So we all need to be extremely vigilant and share data at the same time.
So there's a connection between Sandy Hook and chemtrails. Now, for those of you who have no idea about Sandy Hook, it was a capstone drill that was actually run on the 13th and then portrayed as real on the 14th. And if you watch this video, that as crazy as that sounds, it shows you how it was done and what was done. But what the connection is, if you look at the radar data, the historic radar data, they were laying down chemtrails right above Sandy Hook, Connecticut, heavy, so it just put a complete mask over Sandy Hook, so no aircraft or satellites could see what was happening on the ground.
I'm sure everything you're saying sounds crazy to a lot of people, David, but let's stand back and look at 9/11, and to a lot of people, still, that sounds crazy, and yet if you stand back and just simply look at Building 7 collapsing, it's completely ludicrous to think that the official story could even have any grounding in truth, that a 50-story steel structure high-rise building collapses at free fall speed in 7 seconds because some furniture was burning on the first floor. Anybody who believes that story should seek therapy. I mean, it's seriously. I mean, so the things that are going on right now that cause distractions, like the timing of the Sandy Hook. Again, that's important. Whenever there were some big geopolitical events going on at that time, and suddenly this event happens, and it seems like it's always the case. The bridge that collapsed in Minnesota somewhere several years ago, right when there was some very, very damning geopolitical events going on, suddenly this bridge collapses, and then there's another shooting somewhere else, and there's always these events that come up. And then the bridge, in fact, looked like there were steel girders cut. There was a lot of data around that looked like that event was orchestrated. So they are very good. In fact,
what happened the day before 9/11 with Donald Rumsfeld? Anybody remember that? The day before.
$2.3 trillion missing. Never heard of again.
Yeah, testified before Congress, right, Dave?
Yep.
Right, and if people don't know what a trillion is. A trillion is $100 a second for 10,000 years.
Puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
That's what a trillion is.
And now let's look at the derivatives markets. Right now, and people don't realize all the quote-unquote wealth in the markets right now is based on derivatives, perhaps as much as a quadrillion. That's a number that's very difficult to get your arms around, 1,000 trillions, and that's what the wealth is based on. They have to pump the market up. They have to keep the retirement accounts looking solid so that everybody doesn't panic. That keeps them in their complacent coma and unwilling to look at the bigger picture. So everything at this point is a snake eating its own tail. They can't maintain it much longer, I would argue. It's closing in from every direction, so people need to be especially vigilant, and we really need to keep our stride right now and focusing on one issue. If we could expose climate engineering, the rest would collapse.
You threw out the number a quadrillion. It's impossible for people to understand that. Just one more analogy. A trillion seconds, 1 trillion with a T, seconds, is 31,000 years.
Hard to get your arms around.
Yeah, that definitely.
31,000 years is 1 trillion seconds. And they're throwing those numbers out. Oh, we got $17 trillion debt, 27 trillion. Now they're talking quadrillions. It's unfathomable.
Right. And the day before 9/11, what was that? That was announced by Donald Rumsfeld in front of Congress, Dave?
Yeah. 2.3 trillion. Seems like a small number these days.
Is missing, right? He said it's missing. We can't account for it. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's
actually
right.
for the whole Pentagon, and this was swept under the rug, but since 97, there's 8.5 trillion unaccounted for. How do you lose 8.5 trillion? And that's only figures that they can find or see or somehow account for. How much more has been printed from the endless printing machine of the Fed central banks? Again, this whole situation is a massive card house. It's about to come down.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, we got callers on the panel here ready to call in.
Dave, thank you. Great data, Dave.
One quick thing.
Yeah.
Waking up to chemtrails, 9/11, Sandy Hook, or the Boston bombing. I don't care which one you wake up to. Once you wake up to one of them, you can see the truth behind the other one. So can I just plug my Facebook page that just talks about those issues only, it's called Exposing the Big Three. You spell out three. Anyone wants to have all the research is whittled down so you can get the best research without finding a million hits when you search for it.
Dave, send me a link to your site too, please.
Will do.
Thank you.
Great, Dave.
Right,
thank you. Thank you for your work, Dave. Appreciate that. Caller with your number that ends in 10. Welcome to the show. Who are we speaking with?
Yeah, hey guys, Dan Cherry in Rochester, New York. How are you today?
Hey, Dan.
Hey, guys. Hey. Hey, listen, Dane, you guys, all you guys were talking about the early adoption of being able to swallow what's going on with all this stuff, and I think that's critically important to understand and recognize as far as any project, a company, whatever, with a product, whatever. You have the early adopters, and then eventually the masses get on board. And I can't help to say that I do tremendous research, and the masses are getting on board. I agree with you guys wholeheartedly with that, and it's heartening. It sucks in the same way because it's a race against time, against people who are doing all this stuff to us. But anyway, I want to make just a few points and a couple of quick questions, and I'll get off here. The importance in all this stuff is for anybody listening to you guys and going through all this stuff, is to recognize there are a lot of dots that do connect. And in deference to the caller you just had, I actually had a point that I was going to make about that same video. Now that video was created by a guy I know actually very well. And yes, it is being removed as soon as it gets put onto the internet. So I'm going to go out of my way to actually get a hold of the video because I want to put it onto torrent sites on the internet where these SOBs can't remove this stuff. And I will get you guys copies if you guys can't get copies from other people you're talking to. I want to make a point about the Northeast real quick. In New York, where I am, people are incredibly sick here. And we have not seen sun in probably 2 months. And I don't mean a little bit or just a little bit we haven't seen. We are just incredibly inundated, and the pattern is late at night, skies clear completely. First thing in the morning, about 6 o'clock, they plasmize the whole sky, and everybody starts coughing, and we don't see sun. It's a horrible place to be. People get very sick, vitamin D deficiencies, etc. I want to make a point again about the connecting of the dots real quick. An interesting story that just came out. There was a report about the superbugs that are coming out relative to, say, the biologicals and these types of things that the FDA and these people, whoever, the CDA, what's the organization? Disease Control, CDC. They're talking about these organisms coming out, and an interesting thing that I read in one of the reports was that they were talking about the countries they expected to be hit the hardest of all things were the BRICS countries. They are the ones who are trying to take down the U.S. dollar, right, and control their own banking system. So that's what I mean about connecting the dots. So I want to put a real quick plug in for you guys. Thank God you guys are here. Thank you, God. You guys have never relinquished your passion for what you're doing. You guys are amazing. Thank you for being there. Just quick questions. Dane, or anybody, do you guys have any thoughts, or I guess Dane specifically, do you have thoughts about the rain that all of a sudden inundated Southern California? And also, have you heard of any other spraying going on in the Northeast that rivals what I'm talking about as far as our not getting any sun at all and that kind of thing? And I'll back off here. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. People need to look at the combination map. Try to find a combination radar visible map. They exist. That way you can see where it's raining and where it's cloud cover. And you will see, as I posted this last week, consistently most of the North American continent covered with rainless cloud cover. That's the goal of solar radiation management. On the rain in Southern California, yes, it rained in a few spots. I grew up in Southern California. I know what the normal rain scenario was like there, but when you have hillsides that have been completely burnt to a crisp, down to hydrophobic soils. This means when the soils have been heated so much, resins from flora create a hydrophobic layer below the surface, and that soil then sloughs off when any rain hits it. So it looks catastrophic when they film a few neighborhoods that got buried. Not a big deal in most places. A few big downpours, yes, that created some headlines, but overall, they're making theater out of this, period. And as I stated earlier, it appears they're trying to just funnel as much moisture in as they can across the West that they can then aerosolize the natural upper-level winds, continue to float that aerosolized cloud cover across the rest of the U.S. That's part of the goal. It's like a giant evaporative cooler to try to keep the sun off the country. So that's what I would say is going on right now. They're trying different things. They're desperate, and they're bound to be more dangerous now. Russ, I don't know if we have time for one more real fast one.
Yep, Dane, thank you for calling. Caller with your number that ends in 04. Welcome to the show. Who are we speaking with?
Hey there. It's Kim Berry.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, Kim. How are you?
Not too bad. Like Dan was saying, I'm a little further than he is, but we very, very rarely see the sun. And whenever we do, we're pulling curtains open and dancing and celebrating. But like he was saying, we do see the spraying first thing in the morning. I mean, if you look out there, anytime between 6 and 6:45, they're just tag teaming it out there. I mean, the stripes are going across the sky. And
Can I say something, Kim? Before we run out of time, I want to say something about you and your commitment. And I am so immensely grateful, and I have seen the pictures of you, your daughter in the snow, and completely standing ground under the worst circumstances there with weather and so forth. And you're the epitome of a person that's committed to the fight, and I personally want to honor you, and I am very grateful for all you've done for this cause. I want to just state that clearly and publicly, so thank you.
Aww.
I'd like to say the same thing. This is Russ. She manages our Facebook group, which has over 26,000 members, tirelessly, works day and night. Thank you for all you do, Kim. I'm sorry we're out of time. This is Russ Tanner on behalf of Dane Wigington and Greg Palin. We're on GeoEngineering Watch Radio at ucy.tv every Saturday at 12 noon Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week right here on ucy.tv.
Smile.